The government admits the imposing of social restriction measures throughout Java and Bali is not effective to slow the spread of COVID-19. Myanmar military television says the military was taking control of the country for a year. Lebanese military clash with protesters in Tripoli as people from across the country travels, demonstrating against country's coronavirus lockdown measures.
Hello and welcome. You're watching TVRI's English News Service, airing news from home and around the world. I'm Sesko Satrio. Those were today's top stories, and now let's start of us report from home. Aftershock with a magnitude of 4.5 rocked Mamuju Regency, West Sulawesi, forcing its residents to evacuate once more to safer grounds.
The aftershock took place last night around 8:10 p.m. local time, with the Meteorology, Climatology and Geophysics Agency, or BMKG, recorded the shock's epicenter to be located in Majene Regency, nearby the first epicentrum. At the time, the first epicentrum showed a magnitude of 6.2 that happened 2 weeks ago. The last quake was detected 45 km northeast of Majene with a depth of 14 kilometers. Aftershock was felt in Majene, Mamuju and Mamasa. Although not showing any possibility of a tsunami, the shock panic among local residents. The aftershock was felt in a number of regencies in West Sulawesi and forced local residents to have returned to their homes to evacuate yet again to safer grounds, to shelters. Among the many shelters available to house these residents at one of TVRI's office in West Sulawesi, residents also brought along bedding essentials and set up tents. Maya, a Rangga sub-district resident, said she had to evacuate together with her family members as they fear more aftershocks could happen. Despite her family home experienced minor damage, she still opted to seek refuge due to safety reasons.
The government confessed that enforcement of restriction on public activities in Java and Bali from January 11th to 25th, which is then extended until February 8th, as ineffective in suppressing COVID-19 spread due to weak and inconsistent implementation of the Public Activity Restriction, or PPKM, among the public.
President Joko Widodo evaluated and reviewed the implementation of January 11th to 25th Public Activity Restriction, or PPKM. The curve of COVID-19 case in Indonesia remained high during the enforcement of PPKM, whereas essence of the PPKM is to prevent and hold public mobility to slow down the outbreak. During January 2021, daily addition of COVID-19 cases have broke highest record 5 times that the President called for Coordinating Minister of Maritime and Investment Luhut Binsar Panjaitan to engage with epidemiologists to design comprehensive policies regarding public activity restriction. Other than that, the President also highlighted on the inconsistency and weak enforcement of PPKM, conveying that the head of state wanted for the area of the government to get actually engaged in forcing the implementation of PPKM in the public. Therefore, in the second phase of PPKM, which has been going from January 26th to February 8th, President Joko Widodo instructed for the TNI Commander-in-Chief Hadi Cahyanto, the National Police Chief Listio Sigit Prabowo, and Minister of Religious Affairs Yakut Khalil Kumas to intensely be involved in the field to impose the regulation, while also setting good example, informing and disseminating necessity of health protocol as part of PPKM.
The Ministry of Health will add the availability of beds in hospitals as a follow-up on several hospitals that are fully occupied by COVID-19 patients. The additional beds will be adjusted with the transmission zone in regions. In some areas, a large number of hospitals are fully occupied by COVID-19 patients as the number of those exposed by COVID-19 increases. The Ministry of Health will provide additional beds in these fully occupied hospitals to anticipate more increase of COVID-19 patients. The additional beds will be adjusted with the situation or transmission risk zone of the respected areas. These additional beds provided could reach 40%, and intensive care unit or ICU will be allocated 5 to 10% of beds. 30% for yellow zone hospitals and 15% for hospitals categorized as green zone. The additional beds will be followed by additional number of health workers. The Health Ministry ensured that these hospitals can optimally treat COVID-19 patients. The KBK for the first time held an open case reconstruction of the COVID-19 social aid or bansos corruption.
KBK carried out case reconstruction of the COVID-19 social aid or bansos corruption, which ensnared former social minister Juliari Peter Batubara. KPK for the first time held the case reconstruction in open for public at the KPK's ACLC building in Kuningan area of South Jakarta earlier today. In this case, ex-Minister for Social Affairs Juliari Batubara is named as one of the suspects. He was determined as suspect alongside 4 other individuals, namely Mateus Joko Santoso, Adi Wahyono, Ardian EM, and Hari Sidabuke. First 2 of the names mentioned are commitment officers at the Ministry of Social Affairs, while the rest are from private sector, being vendor of the social aid procurement. KPK suspected Juliari of receiving a share of 10,000 rupiah per social aid package, each worth 300,000 rupiah, and that in total Juliari has received a total of 8.2 and 8.8 billion rupiah.
At least 13 killed in car bomb shooting in Syria's north. The successive explosions on Sunday took place in the town of Azaz, another village some 50 kilometers away, both areas held by Syrian rebel fighters allied with Turkey.
2 car bombs exploded 2 hours apart on Sunday in the northwest Syrian town of Azaz and another in village about 50 kilometers or 30 miles away. The explosion in the areas controlled by Syrian opposition fighters allied with Turkey killed 6 civilians in Azaz, including a child, and 6 fighters at a checkpoint in a village near the town of Al-Bab, first responders known as Syrian Civil Defense and opposition media reported. Turkey and allied Syrian fighters control large parts of the northern Syria and are at odds with government forces and Kurdish-led forces who are considered terrorists by Ankara. The opposition-controlled areas are the scene of recurrent attacks that are rarely claimed by any one side. The Syrian Civil Defense said it had responded to 11 explosions in northwestern Syria since the start of January.
Myanmar military television said today that the military was taking control of the country for 1 year, while the report said many of the country's senior politicians, including Aung San Suu Kyi, had been detained.
In a video posted online, a viewer filmed a TV broadcast showing a presenter on military-owned Myawaddy TV announcing the takeover and cited a section of the military-drafted constitution that allows the military to take control in times of national emergency. He said the reasons for takeover was in part due to the government's failure to act on the military's claim of voter fraud in last November's election and its failure to postpone the election because of the coronavirus crisis. The announcement follows days of concerns about the threat of a military coup and military denials that it would stage 1 and came on the morning the country's new parliament session was to begin. The takeover is a sharp reversal of the partial yet significant progress toward democracy Myanmar made in recent years, following 5 decades of military rule and international isolation that began in 1962. It would also be shocking fall from power for Suu Kyi, who led the democracy struggle despite years under house arrest and won a Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts.
Myanmar military arrests President U Win Min and national leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi in the early hours on Monday.
The Myanmar military detained the country's de facto leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and President U Win Min in the early hours of Monday, according to National League for Democracy or NLD spokesperson Dr. Myo Nyunt. Some of the ruling party's Central Executive Committee members, lawmakers and regional cabinet members have been taken into custody as well. The apparent military coup occurred just hours before the scheduled start of the first session of the new NLD-dominated parliament on Monday morning. Mobile phone services have been cut off in Nai Pitao. The arrests follow last week's sharp escalation in tensions between the civilian government and the military after the latter made what was perceived as a threat to stage a coup if the government failed to act on its claims of mass fraud in November's general election. The NLD won the vote in a landslide. According to the constitution, only the president can declare a state of emergency and hand over power to the military. The state-run television service is currently cut off and only the military-owned Myawaddy channel is accessible. Mobile communications are limited to within regions only.
Eyewitnesses told of their panic after a suspect left one person dead and another with minor injuries before fleeing a shooting scene at a northern Wisconsin mall.
Police were called to the Fox River Mall in Grand Chute, a suburb of Appleton, at about 3:30 p.m. Sunday. The unidentified shooter remained on the loose Sunday night, authorities said. Grand Chute police officer Travis did not identify either victim. One witness said she was still shaking as she recalled the panic of the incident.
A bunch of my customers and I were in the my employees were in the back. All of a sudden we heard gunshots and everybody scrambling in the mall asking what's happening, and everybody was telling me that there's a shooting. Anybody who was in the food court by Rockies, I immediately told them to jump my counter, get into the bathroom, lock the door. There's people with families too.
Was it scary? I mean, did you hear
it? It was scary. I heard the gunshots. This is the first time I've ever heard gunshots literally in a mall. I've been working here since August. This is all a shock to me. I'm still shaking terribly. I'm lucky.
One said the shooter left the mall before officers arrived. Police said they were interviewing witnesses and following leads. No motive was immediately released.
Protesters clashed with Lebanese troops in Tripoli, Lebanon, leaving 9 injured with 1 hospitalized after the Lebanese military used tear gas to disperse the crowds.
Lebanese military clashed with protesters in Tripoli as people from across the country traveled to the city to demonstrate against the country's coronavirus lockdown measures. 9 people were injured, with 1 hospitalized after the Lebanese military used tear gas to disperse the crowds. According to the military, 17 people were arrested. Protests against the lockdown have been taking place regularly for almost a week, and clashes with authorities have killed 1 person and injured hundreds of others. Tripoli has been the center for demonstrations against the country's political class, with 2 participating denouncing Lebanon's nearly 1-month shutdown that has exacerbated already dire conditions.
Defying authorities, around 250 people marched through the streets of the Peruvian capital, Peru, in protest against a second lockdown.
The restrictions will be in place for the next 2 weeks in an attempt to curb the second wave of COVID-19 infections that has overloaded healthcare facilities across the country. In addition to the city of Lima, 10 regions of Peru are affected by these new measures. Demonstrators do not agree with the new measures, which do not allow many to work, and they argue the government is not doing enough to assist them financially. At one point, protesters attempted to enter a local television station and were then met by police who repelled and clashed with the demonstrators. Peru had its first lockdown at the beginning of March last year that lasted more than 100 days. The country of 33 million people has recorded more than 1 million infections and more than 40,000 deaths from COVID-19.
On the fourth full day of work, a member of the World Health Organization mission team investigating the origins of the coronavirus said he'd had a really good, really important meeting at Hubei Center for Disease Control, a site of key interest in the early history of COVID-19.
British zoologist Peter Daszak made the brief comments while being driven away from the Hubei Center for Disease Control. The team's first face-to-face meetings with Chinese scientists took place on Friday. The members with expertise in veterinarian, virology, food safety and epidemiology have visited 2 hospitals and markets that were centers of the early outbreak. The WHO based in Geneva, Switzerland said that its team plans to visit hospitals, markets like the Huanan Seafood Market, linked to many of the first cases, the Wuhan Institute of Virology and laboratories at facilities like the Wuhan Center for Disease Control. The mission has become politically charged as China seeks to avoid blame for alleged missteps in its early response to the outbreak. A single visit by scientists is unlikely to confirm the virus's origins. Pinning down an outbreak's animal reservoir is typically an exhaustive endeavor that takes years of research, including taking animal samples, genetic analysis, and epidemiological studies. The Chinese government has promoted theories with little evidence that the outbreak might have started with imports of frozen seafood tainted with a virus, a notion roundly rejected by international scientists and agencies. A possible focus for investigators is the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the city where the outbreak began.
The city of Perth has been locked down for 5 days after Western Australia state's first case of local COVID-19 infection in almost 10 months.
The city of 2 million people and coastal towns to the south have been locked down from Sunday night until Friday night.
It's just the reality of the situation. I don't envy the politicians. I don't envy the chief health officer. I think it's a really terrible situation. I think it just brings home to everyone that the pandemic is still raging around the world. And we need to be mindful as Australians and to really be fortunate how lucky we are at this stage.
The restrictions were put in place after a security guard who worked at a quarantine hotel contracted a highly contagious British variant of the virus. Overseas travelers who arrive in Perth must isolate for 40 days. All residents must stay at home unless shopping for essentials, attending to medical needs, exercising within their neighborhood, or working if unable to do so remotely. Schools, which were due to resume on Monday, will remain closed for another week. The last previous known case of someone being infected with COVID-19 within Western Australia was on April 11th. Western Australia, Australia's largest state by area, has remained virus-free for months by enforcing the nation's toughest border restrictions in an elimination strategy. Those within the state have enjoyed some of Australia's least restrictive pandemic measures because of the low risk.
News from sports. 3 first-half goals earned Roma a comfortable win against Hellas Verona in Serie A on Sunday.
For Roma after 2 straight defeats.
It's now 2 straight wins for Roma after 2 straight defeats. This is a 3-1 victory over Hellas Verona to move them up to 3rd. A towering header from Gianluca Mancini. And then a fine example of the towering talent of Henrik Mkhitaryan. The Armenians' 9th league goal of the season, already up to last season's haul. Roma's 3rd came after some poor keeping from Marco Silvestri, the rebound for Boia Majoral. Roma just 6 points behind leaders AC Milan. One of the most exciting young talents in Serie A scored a solo goal that will be long remembered by Napoli fans. Eljif Elmas, a 21-year-old from North Macedonia, showed real composure to score his second goal in as many games. Napoli beat Parma 2-0, the second from Matteo Politano, as they move up to 5th. Parma have lost 8 of their last 9. And Lazio move up to 6th after their 3-1 win over Atalanta, who dropped to 7th. And this was the other outstanding goal of the weekend from Adam Maruzic, and remarkably, it is the Serbians' first goal of the season. Lazio's second was also impressive, from keeper to goal in a few seconds, well taken by Joaquin Correa. Lazio's 6th win in 7.
Wayne Taylor Racing wins 3rd consecutive Rolex 24. Taylor replaced his entire lineup for the move to Acura and hired Albuquerque, as well as his older son Ricky Taylor, Helio Castro Neves and Alexander Rossi.
Wayne Taylor Racing won its record-tying 3rd consecutive Rolex 24 at Daytona, using a new car and a new lineup to beat some of the best racers in the world. Philippe Albuquerque held off Kamui Kobayashi and Renger van der Zand, both part of WTR's winning teams the last 2 seasons, and both seeking to become the first winners of 3 consecutive Rolex races, to give the overall Taylor team its 4th win in the last 5 years at Daytona International Speedway. Wayne Taylor replaced his entire lineup for the move to Acura and hired Albuquerque, as well as his older son Ricky Taylor, Helio Contra Neves and Alexander Rossi. The trio all drove the Acura the last 3 seasons for Team Penske, but needed new jobs when Penske closed at the end of last year. It's the first Rolex for Castro Neves and Rossi. Albuquerque won in 2018 driving a Cadillac, and Ricky Taylor won in a Cadillac for his father's team in 2017.
Wins the Rolex 24 at Daytona!
Norway's high flyer Granerud extends World Cup lead in Germany. Poland's Piotra Żyła took 2nd spot with a 137-meter leap.
Halvor Egner Granerud claimed his 8th ski jumping World Cup victory of the season in Willingen, Germany. With the day's action reduced to just 1 round due to difficult wind conditions, Norway's high flyer won with a jump of 149 meters and 154.3 points. Granerud's first place finish puts him even further clear of Germany's Markus Eisenbichler at the top of the World Cup standings with 1,206 points following 17 events this season. Poland's Piotr Zila took 2nd spot with 137-meter leap and 135 points. Eisenbichler rounded off the podium in 3rd, following a 143-meter effort, which saw him awarded 132.9 points.
On World NTD Day, more than 60 landmarks were lit up to draw attention to the 1.7 billion people around the world still suffering from neglected tropical diseases.
On World NTD Day, more than 60 landmarks were lit up to draw attention to the 1.7 billion people around the world still suffering from neglected tropical diseases. To mark the 2nd annual World NTD Day and to build on the spirit of global collective action, more than 60 landmarks across 40 cities and 24 nations lit up on Saturday, the 30th of January, in an effort to remind people they cannot turn a blind eye to vulnerable health systems around the world. The fight against neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs, is celebrated every January 30th as it calls on the global community to work together to eliminate them. Neglected tropical diseases are a group of 20 conditions that affect more than 1 billion people in rural regions, poor urban areas and conflict zones, with devastating health, social and economic consequences, but they are preventable and treatable. Much progress has been made towards eliminating NTDs over the past decade, but despite such progress, more work is needed to finish the job, with more funding and collaboration to rid the world of these diseases are essential. These well-known monuments span the globe, with landmarks including the Great Wall of China, Leaning Tower of Pisa, Abu Dhabi's Etihad Arena and Tokyo Tower.
That concludes today's edition of English News Service. Join us again tomorrow for more information. I'm Sesko Satrio. Goodbye for now.